This conference will now be recorded.
This conference will be recorded. Welcome, friends. Today on MDG Premium, we're going to talk about business strategy in a pandemic. What are you supposed to do when nobody wants to take your calls? Or talk about anything other than avoiding their own mortality? Special guest star Nick Anderson knows a great deal about health economics. And we were talking this week about a former client of mine that I could no longer tolerate, who I had referred to Nick for a health economics study that would compel hospitalists to understand why their technology was the bomb. And I learned that health economics studies are not cheap. Tell us about that, Nicholas. How come they aren't a few $1,000s? Don't you just need to put together a spreadsheet?
How do you think? Yeah, you'd think, but by the way, welcome to our schoolroom.
Classroom.
We homeschool even before pandemic. So you can't see the banjo, but we have a banjo. No, I've quarantined the children in a different room under quarantine. Yeah, I mean, we sent a bid to a client that Joe referred us to after a number of discussions and saying, look, these things aren't cheap. To build a health economics model, something like a budget impact model or a BIM, sometimes it's called a BIA or a budget impact analysis. A company that I do work with, two companies I do work with actually, these things are 6 figures. This is incredibly expensive, time-consuming work. So I had a phone call with this particular client and said, okay, tell me what you got. And they said, well, here's what our product does. And without getting into too much detail, they're in the radiology space. And I said, all right, well, tell me more about what you do. How does your product work? Is it capital equipment? Is it software? Is it a device? You know, what is it? So we had a phone call. And then the CEO cut to the chase and said, well, Nick, how much am I looking at here? And I said, 6 figures flat out. And 6 figures is a big range, 100,000 to 999,999. So of course, I'm not talking on this end. I'm talking more down here. I said, we're probably in the $100,000 to $200,000 range to build a full budget impact model, the likes of which you could take to Kaiser Permanente. And Kaiser Permanente would say, yeah, but your assumptions are different. We're here in California and you know, our diabetic rate is only this percent. And you go, okay, type that in. And you go, okay, what's your obesity rate? And they say, our obesity, you know, only 3% of our patients are obese. Okay, 3%. And you build the model so that you can type in whatever numbers you need, and then it spits out cost effectiveness. Well, then you get on an airplane, you go talk to a client in Louisiana, and you have a different set of diabetes, obesity, and pediatrics and geriatrics and so on that you can adjust that model to. What was that?
What's an airplane?
It was that thing we took before drones.
Oh.
But we, but I mean, it's this stuff. The bid said we would take 12 to 16.
Nick, I hate to do this, especially since you're the presenter, but I think your bandwidth.
So actually, we sent 2 different bids with 2 different prices in each. For this bid, because it was a particular project, he needed a health economic argument for a hospital, and then.
Nick, your bandwidth is so poor that we may need to cut your video.
My microphone's still on.
There you go. Okay.
Should I keep the microphone or the camera on or off?
As much as I like watching you, you're breaking up to a degree that I think it's unavoidable.
Okay, I'll keep the camera off.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll turn it on again in a minute and see if it
Or maybe even use the phone number to call in.
fixes itself. But in each proposal, because they needed 2 different proposals, they have a product. Okay, give me a sec.
Yeah, we'll need you to call in.
Give
Do you
me a
have the number?
second. Talk amongst yourselves, and then I'll try to call in. And
Joe, just speaking
Oh,
about at the top of the call, you mentioned about, how to do business and how to be active at this time. I mean,
Yes.
I think one of the things that is really important is to cut through the noise. So one of the things that I'm doing is making sure that I don't get tempted. Normally, I'm really tempted by a lot of different people and a lot of different projects. Right now, I'm whittling those down with kind of qualifying statements. Okay, can you afford $150,000 setup fee? If not, okay, let's move on.
What does
I think
let's move
that,
on mean? Does that mean that you don't talk to them anymore?
yeah. I mean, in a polite way, yes. I think it's one of these situations where you get so much noise that you can't concentrate on really fulfilling your core mission to your core clients. And so it's very valuable to make sure that you filter out that noise.
I agree. The advice that I would give, in the marketing channel for MDG Premium, which I believe you're all in, I posted a few things this week that spoke directly to this, and the punchline is, don't go dark. Don't think absolutely nobody wants to hear from me, and therefore I will, just be appropriate and not bring up my special offer because no one wants to hear from me right now. Because if you are in fact selling something that helps people, people need help still.
Sure.
And you can do it with an appropriate tone. Maybe some of my more outlandishly toned things, you can taper that down. But I think the idea of, for example, for me, marketing yourself during a pandemic, how long is this going to last, folks? None of us know. If we take the worst case scenario of until a vaccine is found, we're all going to be out of business in 18 months. We're dead. So it's simply, you can't just come everything to a grounding halt, which is what Nick and I were talking about this. I don't know what you did, but you're crystal clear now what you changed there, Nick. But the conversation, again, from this unfortunate former client with whom neither Nick nor I will have anything to do in the future, they were, initially, they refused to cut their projections. I'm like, what? That doesn't make any sense. And with no projection cut, I was getting calls like, well, Joe, can we do an email campaign? Let's get something out there. And I'm like, what? You're chasing the wrong thing if you're like, when's the email gonna drop? I was just flabbergasted.
yeah.
So, Nick, you're back, and just as I said that, your face kind of got crumpled up a little bit with the video, but let's give this another go. So
Yeah, I'm sorry. I took everybody in the house off of Wi-Fi and see if I can open up some bandwidth if that worked. If it does it again, let me know. But
a little bit.
so
But,
anyway,
I think you should. I think if you kept the entire family in a box so that they were nowhere near like the Wi-Fi, that might help a little bit. If you want to go put them in a box, we'll wait for you.
I usually keep them in a box.
So health
Sorry,
economic studies are really expensive. I thought we
super
could,
expensive. What I wonder if this particular client was thinking is that this is something, why can't you, he kept saying on subsequent phone calls, why can't you guys just do a simple model? Why can't you just simply put down that here's what the standard of care is, and here's what we do, and this is better than this. And he kept saying simple. And I said, I can build you a simple model, sure, for $1,500, I'll send you something, but it's not going to solve your problem. And I said, what we have proposed is what you need. And I said, furthermore, to write a proposal on 2 different health economic studies, because again, he needed one for hospitals and one for payers. So we're talking $100,000 to build this one model, plus or minus a little bit of money, and another $100,000 to build the models that he needed for the payer. So we needed 2 separate things done. And we gave him 2 options in each of those, but suffice it to say, each of them are in the 6-figure range. And I said, we can give you a little $1,500 thing, but there's a big delta between what you're going to get for $100,000, what you're going to get for $1,000. So it's not going to answer your question. I told you twice on 2 separate phone calls that these offers were going to be in the 6-figure range. I have a team of health economists that I oversee, and I'm your advocate with them, saying, here's what he needs, here's what he does not need, because I used to be a payer. So if I was back in the shoes that I used to be in between 2010 and 2017, here's what I would want to see from his company. And if you don't give it to me, you're going to get denied. I was on Intermountain Healthcare's Value Analysis Committee for 4 years. I know what Intermountain Healthcare wants, and it's the same thing Kaiser and Geisinger and all of them want. And I was very blunt with them and said, we have given you proposals for what you need. I haven't overblown this. This was before the pandemic really took off. It had, of course, already started, but it didn't matter because at the end of the day, you're still venture capital backed. You've already raised a Series A. You've got plenty of money. And this is what it costs. So why does everybody spend $5 million on R&D and they spend millions and millions of dollars trying to get through FDA clearance? And then when it comes to health economics, the marketing to payers or the marketing to value analysis committees, they go, what can you throw together for $100? It's like, wait a minute, you didn't say that to the R&D guys. Jay, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, question. How critical is this to the success of the company? In other words, the investment is based on the return on investment. If this could triple their business, then you think they could see that and invest in it if it's that important. So I just how critical is it to their success?
In Tucson, and I lectured at a thing down there, and I was on a panel, and one of the gentlemen that was on the panel with me said every company should be dedicating 20% of their budget to health economics and market access. So if you're unfamiliar with the field of market access, go to Indeed.com or Monster.com and type in market access Medtronic, market access J&J, market access Smith & Nephew, and you'll see these job descriptions of what market access is. Market access is the broad umbrella under which reimbursement and health economics reside. Sales and distribution is outside of that umbrella. There's market access and there's sales. Well, if I was speaking with the CEO of Medtronic and I'd say, what percentage of your budget goes to sales? They'd say, we spend, $10 billion a year on sales. And I say, what budget are you spending on market access? I would hope he'd say $10 billion because the sales rep goes and sells to the physician, but physicians don't write checks. They're middlemen, they're purchasing agents. The market access guy, I used to be the director of market access for a biotech company I started. That guy goes and sells to the people who have the checkbooks, namely Cigna, Aetna, Blue Cross. So to this client that Joe and I had, the argument is, well, what's your ROI? What do you want your ROI to be? Well, he thinks he's going to go march in and talk with a bunch of radiologists and they'll be like, this is the greatest thing ever. Because look at, I used to get this image, now I get this image, and it's so much better now. And you say, well, as soon as the radiologist is the one writing the $100,000 check, well, then you don't need me. You need a sales guy. But radiologists don't write $100,000 checks. They walk down the hallway to the value analysis committee, to the VAC, or the VAT, V-A-T, the value analysis team, and they say, hey, I really want this cool new thing, and it's $100,000. And the value analysis committee says, well, where's your health economics? Where's your value modeling? Where's your outcomes research, HEOR, health economics and outcomes research? I want all of your HEOR data. And you go, well, here, I got this thing that we had Nick put together for $1,500. And I told this client, I said, you'd be laughed out of the room, that you would look like an amateur. You would look like a guy who made his millions back in the 1990s when all you needed was a fancy physician who really wanted your product. Well, now in the year 2020, there's a thing called PubMed. There's a thing called Cochrane and NICE and CADTH and Australia New Zealand Horizon Scanning Network that all do these systematic literature reviews on technologies like yours. And in fact, one day they will do one, and they'll say, due to a paucity of evidence, due to no randomized controlled clinical trials, due to the fact there is no HEOR published on your technology, we do not recommend to anybody that they should be using this new radiology thing. The end. Well, without paying me and my team $100,000 to work for 16 weeks on your behalf, 16 weeks, a team of health economists with PhDs putting together the models that you need for $100,000. That's what's going to lie in your destiny. You're going to have a review from Cochrane and from NICE and from all these systematic review organizations, Hayes being probably the biggest one in the United States, HAYES. Hayes is going to do a review on these guys' technology one of these days. And it's going to say, due to a paucity of evidence, we cannot recommend utilization of this technology. The end. Well, if you pay us a fortune, and I'm completely unabashed to say it's a fortune. Again, 16 weeks of a team of health economists gathering published literature, because this client didn't have any. He hadn't already gone and done an RCT. He doesn't have data from 1,000 patients over the last 10 years that he could be like, Nick, you don't need to go do a systematic literature review. Here's the data, just amalgamate it into something fancy. And you go, okay, it's now no longer a $150,000 bid, it's a $70,000 bid. Because the other, 80 grand in there was us spending weeks going and pulling data, building models, doing a systematic literature review, and then saying, okay, here's how well this works in non-small cell lung cancer. Here's how well it works in patients with liver cancer from an unknown primary. Here's how well it works here and here and here. We have to do that work. Yes, please.
Mr. Saul has his hand raised. Mr. Saul. You're up, Jonathan. Your mic is on. Oh, what a blown opportunity for Mr. Saul.
If he comes back on, tell me and I'll be quiet again. So
Done.
let me tell you this. When you and I spoke the other day about me coming on today,
Yeah.
we kind of discussed what can companies be doing now while everyone's hibernating because of the coronavirus. Well, here's a prime example. Here's 16 weeks that a company that can't have sales reps in the hospital. Hospitals are telling salesmen, get out of here. Unless you have coronavirus, we don't want you here. Even fathers of expecting mothers are not allowed to be in the labor and delivery anymore. Hospitals are clamping down. Well, this is a perfect time. You already have your venture capital money. You've already got $3, $6, $12 million sitting in your coffer that's not going anywhere. The VCs have already dedicated that cash to your company. Everyone's hibernating for the next foreseeable future, maybe through June or July, until this thing passes. Hopefully it's that quick. And this is a great time to engage with, to get your market access going that can be done quietly in the background. And you can pay a health economist. I don't know if it's $100,000 for everybody, but for some it's 40, 50,000. And you say, look, I got to spend that money anyway. I can't have salesmen going out doing anything anyway. Novitas, Noridian, CGS, WPS, all of the Medicare jurisdictions are on lockdown. They're not holding open public meetings right now. They're obligated to every quarter. Medicare has to have open public meetings. No one's doing anything. So what a great time to have a bunch of nerds sitting in front of their computers building health economic models for you, so that when we crawl out of the coronavirus, you go, look, I've got a $100,000 model here that definitively shows that my product saves money in the hospital setting with a commensurate outcome for patients, that what this guy's going to do, I'll tell you right now, I don't have a crystal ball, but I've done this enough times. He's going to do a little back of the envelope thing, or he's going to find a different consultant that's going to charge him $1,000, and they're going to cobble him together a little cute thing, and he's going to walk into the VAC
If he gets that
at
far.
Intermountain or at Geisinger or wherever. What was that, Joe?
If
Sorry.
he ever gets that far, that he has the privilege of having an audience.
Yes, if he can even make it that far, he'll get some radiologist that'll say, hey, this is really cool. The radiologist will take the $100 little, useless thing that some consultant put together for him and march it into the VAC, and the VAC's gonna be like, are you kidding me? Like, where have you been since 1995? We don't do it this way anymore. This is not how you commercialize into a hospital anymore. You have to have health economists build it. And furthermore, this guy doesn't even know if he needs a cost minimization analysis or a cost effectiveness analysis. He doesn't know. He doesn't even know that there's a difference, let alone cost utility, let alone, I mean, there's different. Yeah, I mean, that's the point of hiring people who do know, because they can go in and say, look, we are not cost effective. I'm just telling you right now, our new radiology technology is not cost effective, but we are cost utile. So cost utility analysis. And you'll get everybody on the value analysis committee that doesn't know the difference either, but they appreciate your honesty and forthrightness. And they go, wait, what's the difference between cost utility, cost minimization, and cost effectiveness? And you go, okay, here's what they are, and we are not cost effective. And they go, well, then why would we want you? And you go, because we're cost minimization. And they go, oh, educate me on what the difference is. Now you've piqued their interest, and you've been very honest with them that you're not cost effective. So value analysis committees, let alone Aetna, Cigna, Medicare, they want the appropriate health economic model for what your product is. So I oftentimes have clients that, me just doing like this. So, I'm putting my finger to the wind and being like, there's not a rat's chance you guys are cost effective. I'll tell you right now, you only improve outcomes after a 90-day follow-up period by 6%. So 6 divided by and you cost $4,500 more on the episode of care. So there's no way you're cost effective. I can just tell you that right now off the top of my head. That does not mean you're dead in the water. You might not need a cost effectiveness model. You might need a cost utility and model or whatever. I beat that dead horse. Well, this is all stuff that med device clients can be dealing with now, because you're only dealing with Nick and my team of nerds, that you don't have to go out and talk to hospitals. You can be doing all this quietly while this storm rages. And then when the storm's over, you go, look at what I got. I got $100,000 or whatever dollar amount, 16 weeks of research that definitively shows that my product has value. But this guy's going to go out and try to do this on his own. He's going to be laughed out of the room.
You know that I, a great fan of your handsome beauty and eloquent speech, could listen to you all day long, but I'm going to try to get you to be a little bit more concise in an answer or two, because there are a few things that I'm like, but this and but that. So number one is, if we were to listen to you at face value, you're saying, if not health economic study, then not commercializable. Is that what you said?
In so many words. So it depends, Joe, on who your customer is. So most people define their customer as the user. And in the lecture that I give at the 10X conference, I say, don't do that. That I've got a 12-year-old little girl downstairs in the kitchen right now who has these American Girl dolls. And I've given this example in the past. The kid that wants the doll is the consumer. Mom and dad who have to pay the $300 for the injection molded plastic out of China for that stupid doll. Hope she didn't hear me, but it's a fortune for these American Girl dolls. We're the customer. So she's the physician, I'm Aetna. So what if you have a product that decreases operating room time by 20 minutes out of a 5-hour procedure? Some pancreaticoduodenectomy or some complicated procedure that normally takes 5 hours, and you say, hey, we bring it from 5 hours down to 4 hours, a 25% savings in OR time. Well, to the client that Joe and I had, he doesn't need the second model because the insurance company couldn't care less. Insurance companies don't reimburse any more, any less, just because you were able to use a medical device like this that takes a procedure down by 25%, because that's a DRG anyway. The patient's going to be in the hospital for more than 2 midnights, or meaning an inpatient stay. It used to be 24 hours, now it's 2 midnights. So Joe, to answer your question, is every client dead in the water if they don't do some modicum of health economics? And the answer is yes and no. Sorry for equivocating on that a little bit, but ultimately, who's your customer? Because if somebody came to me and said, Nick, will you build a health economic?
In this example, if I can save 20% of the time, could I theoretically do 20% more operations and therefore increase my revenue by 20%, all else equal? Isn't that the economic argument for that device?
Yes, it is. But you would only need, for your client, Joe, we built 2 different proposals, one for a health economic study that appeals to payers and one that appeals to hospitals. For what you just described, he doesn't need the payer one. Payers couldn't care less if a surgery takes 20% less. They don't care if it takes 90% less. They care about the admission to discharge time. And if it's 2 midnights, that's inpatient, which means the hospital gets paid a DRG bundled bill, which is $40,000 or whatever, whether it's the surgery took 20 minutes or 20 hours. So all of this are these back and forth emails and discussions that take days and weeks while I don't know anything about your product. What do you got? And you say, hey, I've got this device that we think it saves time in the OR, but we also think it decreases 30-day readmission rates. And you go, whoa, okay, now we're talking payer. 30-day readmission rate is what the payer has to pay for, actually 31 days or more. All of this is the discussions that should be going on while the world's in quarantine. These are all web conferences I can be having with clients saying, okay, tell me what you got. You know, what's your product? And they go, we've got this that can do this and this and this. And you go, okay, let me think about it. Let me talk to my team.
Everyone has to hear that an hour ago, I woke both boys because there's still school, right? Do you hear the, pardon me, they're still not up. And I'm doing this webcast and it's like, I have to listen to the alarms go off. Good job, son. Ugh. Okay.
Long story short, this is all stuff that can be happening.
Because I wanted to ask you something else. And that is, we talked about the case of this former client that is like, well, we're going to help radiologists, the director of radiology. That's our only point in to talk. And I'm thinking, I still don't really understand this. And we've had this conversation a couple times. I know well at this point, and this is from our mutual friend Gunter Vessels, who taught me this acronym, COF. What's the clinical appeal of the thing? What's the operational appeal of the thing? What's the financial appeal of the thing? And without one of those 3, you're done. You need all 3. Great. Everyone I've ever worked with, every client I've ever had can tell me all day long about the clinical appeal. Doctors love this, doctors love that. I ask them, what will it do for operational? How much do you have to change things? Their answer is usually, well, not that much, because all you have to do is this and that. Now, I don't know how to quantify that for a value analysis committee. And then we talked about financials, and almost no one has ever had a formal study. They just say, we're going to save them 20% of their time, and they go to market, and some of them are successful. They don't have a health economic study, I guess, and there's just so many missing pieces to me there. Like, I understand that there's no manufacturer who gets to sit in front of a value analysis committee and say, here's my pitch. So there's always, okay, well, we need a KOL. We need a real champion to go and get in there. But are we still talking about one individual? The radiologist guy is like, wow, I really got to have this. So he's really sold on clinical. And do we expect that person to be able to explain lucidly, here's how it's going to affect my operation, and here's the financial utility versus savings versus whatever else you said? Is it our job to find one individual and then say, oh my God, thanks. Here's our health economic study, just give that to them. Here's how it affects your operation, just give that to them, and you can go on about your clinical stuff, and then we should be set. How does it work?
We had a meeting at Intermountain. I was there 7 years. The last 4 years that I was at Intermountain Healthcare, I was on the value analysis committee. Ours was called the New Diagnostics and Devices Committee, but we had bureaucrats in the room. We had clinicians in the room, including nurses, nurse practitioners, physicians. You had policy people. You had a little bit of everything. The idea is that you're getting a smattering of people in the room with different viewpoints. And one of my favorite examples, I gave this at 10X, Joe, was that there was a company that had methylene blue staining that was injected transrectally into the colon. And the methylene blue would stain polyps so that you could see them more readily and discern polyp from healthy tissue. And you injected a ton of this stuff. I mean, it was like, I don't know, a quart, a pint, I don't know, a whole bunch of this. And then after, so the gastroenterologist was like, hey, I would really like this. It's cheap. It's methylene blue that's specifically labeled to stick to polyps. And the guy in the room that squelched this technology was the chief of, or he was like the director of maintenance or something. He was essentially the chief janitor of the hospital. And he goes, you guys get after me for taking an extra 20 minutes to clean up an OR after you guys do a colonoscopy. What happens to all the blue stuff you put in this guy's rectum? And they go, it just spills out everywhere and goes on the floor. And he's like, it's going to take me an extra half hour to clean that up. And that was it. That killed the technology. So value analysis committees have a whole weird group of people, some that don't say anything for months during all these meetings. And then every now and again, you'll get a weird curveball of somebody that like the janitor that'll bring this up. Well, on that value analysis committee, we never had anybody from industry come in. What we said is you've got to go find a clinical advocate, you know, the chief of radiology or the chief of orthopedic surgery, somebody that says, hey, I really want this thing. And we go, okay, bring him or her in. I don't want Medtronic in here. I don't want to see another PowerPoint. I don't want to talk to you guys.
Is that right?
I want to talk to the clinician who hopefully when you guys are out of the room.
You find one person
Yes.
who says, I need a value analysis committee.
Yes, you might have to, yes, one person that, yeah, they're the advocate. The advocate will be the one that brings in the dossier of evidence that Medtronic has given them, or mine and your, Joe, our radiology client. They have this dossier of randomized controlled trials, of health economics and outcomes research, this $5 million binder that they bring to chief of radiology, and chief of radiology says, hey, the value analysis committee is meeting Wednesday at 3 p.m. You guys better have me your binder or I'm not going into the meeting. And they go, oh, okay, we got it. It's all ready to go. Hand it to him. He goes into the value analysis committee and the value analysis says, what do you got? You're on the agenda, line number 3. And he says, hey, I've got this really cool new radiology thing I really want to use. Here's all the evidence. Let's discuss this again in 6 weeks when we reconvene. Everyone has 6 weeks to go read it. We all come back, we vote yes or no.
So meeting 1 is, let me hand you this book and everyone go and read it and we'll talk about it in 6 weeks. That's the whole first meeting. There's no like,
perhaps every.
Let me put up 5
It can
slides
be.
to tell you what's in the book.
It can be, and I'm being very stylistic for the sake of a web conference, that they may allocate an hour and say, okay, Dr. Jones, tell us about this new radiology device that you really want to use. And they say, okay, I've spoken with Joe's client. They've given me their spiel. Here's their dossier of evidence that includes a very expensive health economic model, and all of our clinical trials are all in this thing. Here's a little PowerPoint they gave me on a flash drive. Let me see if I can get through this. But I'm not a shareholder. I'm not part of their company. I'm not a consultant to them. I just really like the thing. So if that doctor does this without this dossier of evidence, you're going to have 5 or 6 people on that committee that are going to say, habeas corpus. You know, show me the evidence, show me the proof, show me something. You're a radiologist that makes 900 grand a year and you want a new shiny toy, and the new shiny toy costs the hospital $500,000 of capital equipment plus a $5,000 a month maintenance package plus this and this and this. I don't trust you. So this is the little girl standing up making a PowerPoint presentation about why she should get an American Girl doll, and mom and dad sitting in the room going, wait a minute. If you can show that having an American Girl doll gets you into Harvard, okay, you know, but prove me that. If you can't show it, I ain't gonna pay. So this was, let me give you a very real world example. Intuitive Surgical. I was at Intermountain when Mako, the Makoplasty is what it was called, the surgical robot for the knee. Well, Intermountain well, let me be careful how I say this. Intermountain had mixed reviews on robotic surgery. This is circa 2012, 2013, when robotic surgery was really coming about. And we were having a hard time recruiting new physicians because Intuitive Surgical and Mako Surgical, I think is the name of the company, they've since been bought out.
Yeah.
What? Who were they bought by? Were they bought by Intuitive? Anyway.
Maybe. I'll look it
up. Mako ends up coming to all of the residency programs, and they get all the young residents, and they're all 26 years old. They get them all hooked on robotic surgery, and they say you can't do a hysterectomy and a total knee and all this without a robot. So then the residents graduate. Who was it?
Stryker
bought them. Okay. So the residents then move to Salt Lake City, Utah. They want to work for Intermountain Healthcare, and they show up and they say, hey, this is really great. You know, thank you for giving me the $1 million tour. Where's your robot? And Intermountain says, we're not buying a robot because they're expensive and they don't improve outcomes. And the young newly graduated resident says, well, I don't know any other way of doing a hysterectomy other than with a robot. You know, I've done a few laparoscopic surgeries, I've done a few open, but I was trained on I made a very clever sales on behalf of Mako and on behalf of Intuitive Surgical. But Intermountain did the research and said, look, a robotic surgery versus a regular laparoscopic or open procedure is no better in terms of outcomes, but it costs this much more. So why would I pay for that? There was no health economic argument for it at all. So what happens when Mako or Intuitive shows up in Salt Lake City and gets all of the orthopedic surgeons and OBGYN, everybody all excited about it, is that those surgeons then come to the Intermountain Value Analysis Committee, and they better have this data. They better have something, because right off the bat, everyone goes, okay, how much is the robot? And they go, it's $1 million. Okay, how often do you have to have all the tools replaced? Oh, every 9 surgeries. All right, how much is that? 40 grand. Okay, do we get any improvement in outcomes? Do we have a decrease in infection rate before 30 days when we're still on the hook? What do we get out of this?
Argument.
All of that is work.
Where are we now with robots? Here we are, 2020. Has the argument shifted?
They've taken over the world? No, so the argument is shifted in the sense that what payers have done historically is they've said, historically meaning 5 years, have said, we will reimburse because laparoscopic surgery versus robotic surgery is non-inferior. Non-inferior is a brilliant market access strategy, a topic for a different day. Too many companies try to beat the standard of care, and I'm like, why? Go in at the same standard of care and gobble up market share. You don't have to be superior, just go in as non-inferior. So we've all agreed that a laparoscopic hysterectomy is no better or no worse than a robotic hysterectomy. So what insurance companies have done is said, for laparoscopic, we pay 10 grand. For robot, we pay 10 grand. And the hospital goes, well, we'll never cover our costs. I mean, the robot's so expensive. And we go, that's your problem, guys. Ain't my problem. I am here to represent the members who work at 7-Eleven, who make minimum wage and pay us dearly for their monthly healthcare premium. My job is to be a good steward of their dollars. And I only reimburse extra if you can prove to me an extra outcome, but you can't. Because whether you stick laparoscopes in like this and you cut out a uterus, or whether you stick a laparoscope in like this and you use a robot to remove it, the outcomes are the same. So Joe, to answer your question, where are we now after 15 years of robotic surgery from a payer health economic perspective? What's happened is payers have just said, yeah, we'll reimburse for it. It's non-inferior. Hospitals, if you guys are the suckers buying these robots, then it's up to you because it's your recruiting tool to get young talent out of the best programs. Then you guys pay the extra. But don't expect us to pay $10,000 for a robotic hysterectomy and only $2,000 for a laparoscopic one, because frankly, we get the same outcomes. We pay the same price for both.
If you listen
again, the whole point of this discussion,
I was just about to say, if you listen carefully, you can now hear my wife scolding my children not getting up for school. If you listen carefully. Jonathan Saul's having difficulty with his connectivity. He asks, so the main idea that this is one of the primary differentiators, what are the steps to get the parents to pay for the study as just one part of the proofs that lead up to the differentiator? I'm sorry, I read that out loud and I don't understand it. I don't know if you understood it.
So I think
John, can you
if
try
he's
to
using
unmute
my
yourself
analogy
and give it a go? I see you're still there, but I didn't quite get your meaning.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
So Nick, in the process of the companies trying to get this into the market, they are saying that their product is better, faster, there's various time savings, there's various cost savings. It's all part of a differentiation strategy. And that differentiation strategy, one of the core things would be the economic model, presenting that economic differentiator to the payer, the person the parents, as you put them, the person who's going to be allowing that product to enter into the market or enter into the hospital or enter into the network or the system. I'm trying to understand better how that process sits in a series of priority steps so that it leads up to that proving that differentiator is valuable, because the study that you do is theoretical, and then after time you end up proving it's a benchmark to measure against something, and then over time you actually achieve that differentiator, right?
So let me answer your question by telling you, just like I said, a couple of weeks ago, I was in Arizona with Michelle, and the global director of market access for Roche came up to me later. We had a phone call a couple of days later when I got back to Utah, and we were just talking, and I said, you know, if I were to start my own medical device company, I have a new cool trinket for carotid artery stenosis or whatever it is. If I were to start a new company, I have this new technology, the first person I would hire would be a health economist. They would be the vice president of the company on day one, before I hire an engineer, before I hire anybody really. And now that's self-serving, right? I'm talking my own book here because I'm a health economist. Of course I'm going to say that. But she goes, and I said that to her. I was like, you know, that is self-serving because that's what I do. And she goes, you know what's funny? Our CEO, we just had a big Roche-wide international meeting, and our CEO stood up and said if they were to start a new medical device company, the first person they'd hire would be a health economist. And I was like, wow, if the CEO of Roche, the largest diagnostic company on earth, is thinking that same way, that tells you the tidal shift. So to answer your question, where does this go in priorities? Again, I'm talking my own book here, to use a Wall Street term. My answer is it should be numero uno priority. If you have no value to either the health insurance companies or to hospitals, what value do you have? If you can't answer those, Nick, two, then
what I mean is, I understand that I consider that to be the number one differentiator and the thing that needs to be the highest differentiator, because if you're not creating value, you're creating nothing. But what I'm saying is along the continuity, let's say we've got 18 months or 3 years or something like that to get this going. And fundamentally, you start with the theory that this is going to save time, save lives, save money. You're creating value at that line. What are the priority steps? What are the fundamental steps before you get to this study, and then what are the consequence steps after that study that help reinforce the importance of that study? I'm trying to understand the timeline.
You bet. So here's my notes for the call. I scribbled down. I don't know if you can see that. The first thing I wrote was systematic literature review. So when we do a systematic literature, we are talking big money as well. There's a company in Santa Monica, California that charges a fortune for this, and I know why. So what you do is you say, hey, we've got this new technology, T=0. We just got license for it from the University of wherever, and this is really cool, and we know that this is going to change outcomes in the carotid artery space. And you say, okay, what's the first thing we need to do to use kind of your terminology? The first thing I would do is a systematic literature review. Either do it yourself if you're trained to do it, or hire somebody to do it. And when I was a payer, I'd be baffled at this, that the manufacturers for, I won't tell you the product, it was a artificial skin substitute. They kept publishing data on the same indication. And I was like, guys, you've already answered that. I already know how well this works in diabetic foot ulcers in patients that have an A1C over 10. I get it. Why did you publish another one and another one and another one? I get it, that's fine. Coca-Cola keeps sending out the same message. They've been doing it for 100 years. I get why you want to drive home that we work in diabetic foot ulcers, but you already have coverage there. Aetna, Cigna, Blue Cross, everyone pays for it. How about how well it works in patients under the age of 60 with an A1C of 10? So what happened, I can tell you right now, I know what happened. They never did a systematic literature review on day one of the company. You incorporate on Monday. On Tuesday, you and your chief health economist sit down and you go, we are doing nothing for the next 5 weeks but doing a systematic literature review. And what you do is you go and you start pulling all this data and you say, okay, let's say this is for carotid artery stenosis versus endarterectomy. You go, well, we need to start doing that literature review. What gap are we filling? We know that this is better than doing an endarterectomy. We know that this is time saving and less painful and less risky. Intuitively, we know that because we've never done the study to actually prove it. But ultimately, we've never shown it. We've never actually done it. So you go do a systematic literature review. This takes weeks, it takes time, it takes expertise, and you go gather all the evidence on carotid artery stenting versus endarterectomy. And then you amalgamate the data, you do some health economics, and you go, here's where we need to, this is our beachhead. There is no evidence that this works in patients with 70% stenosis that are asymptomatic. Can our product work in patients that are 70% stenotic and asymptomatic? Yes. Well, there's our beachhead. That's the camel's nose under the tent. So now if anyone says, what do? You say, I have a product that can be put in somebody's carotid that is 70% stenotic and asymptomatic. And you go, wow, that's a narrow, weird mark, And you go, well, how many patients have stenosis? And you say 10 million Americans a year. Well, how many of them are 70% stenotic that are asymptomatic? Only 500,000. Well, your venture capitalists on your board are going to be mad about that. And they're going to go, you're going too narrow. And you go, no, we're not. We're doing what Nick told us. We're going narrow. We're going to define that clinical trial. That means we're going to have the best outcomes in this sliver of patients. Then we will hire a market access team over which this chief of health economics is in charge. And they will go out and they will get us reimbursement from CGS, WPS, Noridian, and Novitas. We'll get local coverage determinations. We will then start to bring in $5 million a month of revenue because we're the only solution in 70% stenotic patients that are asymptomatic. With that money, we will then go do patients that are 80% stenotic, and then 90 and so on and so forth. And after 20 years, you're a billionaire because you put the camel's nose under the tent. After having done a systematic literature review, you know where the gap is. So instead of being like, okay, clinician on our clinical advisory board, where is this most useful? And he goes, any patient with carotid artery stenosis of any degree. And you go, all right, well, let's go hire a CRO and begin that trial. You're casting way too broad of a net. You're going to get too much dross in there. You're going to get too many crappy patients in whom your product has no value, and for whom insurance companies have already determined they're not going to reimburse. So to answer your question, John, the very first thing I would do in order of operations after you start a medical device company is to either pay somebody to do a systematic literature review and say, it is our professional opinion, a third party separate from your board of clinical advisory board, that you need to launch your product in this subset of patients. And there's only 400,000 Americans that have that that have that etiology, or that have that pathology, or whatever it is. And that's where you're going to go for the next 3 years. So now go raise some money for this subset of patients and begin your 36-month-long clinical trial. At the end of that, Michelle will have already got you FDA approval. Now you have FDA approval. At the same time, you have clinical evidence. And at the same time, you have a health economic model that you paid 150 grand for. You have done everything right. And it's only after 36 months that you then hire a marketing and sales team. You do not need a marketing and sales team for 36 months. You have nothing to market and sell. You don't have an FDA approved product, and you don't have the evidence that the payers are going to require. So no need to hire a VP of sales. This can all be done under quarantine during a coronavirus outbreak. So while that's going on, if you started your company today, you have 36 months, 24 months. If you're an orthopedic device, payers require 48 to 60 months. So if this is designed to avoid some fracture in the shoulder, you've got 60 months of outcomes. You've got 5 years before anyone will reimburse for this. But it all begins with a systematic literature review to find out what segment of that problem you're going to solve.
I can't help but think how few people, companies, do what you just said. I don't know of anyone. Luke does.
No, I want to have another question. When we were at 10X London, there was Richard Tucson saying something about the NHS and how they were driven by statistics, like people on the waiting list. They were costing the individual hospitals a lot because there was a penalty on waiting lists. I can also imagine something like when hospitals have bad rates on outcome of procedures, like carotid artery. If you have better statistics on that, how much of an incentive can that be on the hospitals instead of just merely the health economics?
Good to see you. This is funny. Luke came from the Netherlands and stayed in my hometown, Orem, literally 2 streets down here.
Yes.
One block away, and we couldn't meet because of the virus. So he came all the way from the Netherlands. So anyway, good to see you. So yes, all of that plays into this. If a hospital system like the NHS in England, who set the benchmark for all of Europe, if those companies say, look, we can get patients out of the waiting line, you know, it's 4 weeks before they can get septoplasty, or it's on average 10 weeks before we can schedule them for a meningioma resection, or whatever it is. That's all health economic stuff to say, look, we can prove with very clever health economic modeling that we can get a patient out of the waiting line for 5 weeks and into the hospital because of whatever these cost and time saving mechanisms are, thanks to the ingenuity of this. Let me make a quick point. If this isn't a good product, health economics isn't going to turn it into one. So it does begin with clever and very sophisticated engineering. I don't mean to downplay engineering at all, but what I'm saying is we can't turn nothing into something. Health economics can be very clever. So we've all heard there's lies, damned lies in statistics. Well, there's also lies, damned lies in health economics sometimes. I've never seen a health economic model from a manufacturer that doesn't make their product look good. But then I do my health economics and I go, wait a minute, you missed this and this and this. No, you're not as good as you make it sound. But it does begin with a very good technology. And if this technology does not get a patient out of the queue at NHS in half the time, health economics isn't going to do it. So it's imperative that the company go do the clinical trials that shows the things that their customer would want to see. And then a health economist or a team of health economists like I run, we all sit down and go, okay, the company's done as much as we could ask them to do. They did a 50-patient randomized prospective study over 24 months, and here's their data. Let's take that data and marry it with this data and this and this and this, and we'll put together for them a health economic model that shows, yeah, you know what, you are going to save time, you are going to save money. And like I said, maybe they don't save money. It can actually be a really good strategy for a company to go, I don't save you a dime. But what I do is I make you look good because you're the only hospital that can do 12 septoplasties in a day, sinuplasties, let's say, and everyone else can only do 2 a day. So I'm not going to save you money. I'm going to cost you money. But the fact is you'll be able to increase volume by 10 patients a day because of the studies that you did married with all this, and here you go. So what this is not just hiring a clever marketing firm out of New York City and you pay them, or you hire Joe Hage. Joe has his role. You need a marketer that says, look, I don't really care about your science. I care about how this looks. I care about the message we're sending out. I care about a few data points that you can give me. But all I'm going to do is appeal to the little girl buying the American Girl doll, or I will help you appeal to the hospital. But you guys still need Nick Anderson and his team of nerds to help put together a value message. It takes weeks, it takes months. And what value do you guys want us to present for you? And you say, we want a model that shows the National Health Service in the UK that we can get patients out of their queue from 5 weeks down to 1 week. And we go, okay, talk to you in 16 weeks. And we'll put it together if we can. If there is no data for that, we can make assumptions, we can put some things together, but that's on a case-by-case basis.
An unusual pause in Nick talking. I feel as though I must fill the space. Often when we talk, I leave with the conflict of believing everything you say, understanding what you're saying, coming to the conclusion that everybody needs a health economic person, and being conflicted that almost none of my clients ever do. The former ones that I bring to you say, oh my God, that's too expensive. I mean, I don't know how to marry the two, to get people to recognize that has to come, that it is going to cost, that you have to do it, and get over it. Ed, you have something? I mean,
yeah, I've got a question
right now. It's probably in that exact same position. You don't have a lot of money. You really need this study. What are you going to do? You're hearing this from
Nick, I believe what you're saying, and so my company, we've got a urinary catheter. It's got a magnetically controlled valve. It is a hell of a lot more expensive than a Foley. But when you tot up the fact that you put this in once a month versus a Foley that you might be doing up to 6 times a day, you start getting to equivalency. The other advantage we are proposing is that you will have a lot less urinary tract infections because you're not going in and out all the time and so on. Now, my question to you is, and it's interesting to hear what you're saying about this value committee, because the issue of the UTIs isn't really the urologist's problem. It is, but you know, they don't think about that because it happens for them quite infrequently. So it's when you try to, and we have done our own little bit of the type of analysis that you're talking about, not as professionally, and it was all done before I joined the company. But you know, you taking those percentage costs on a percentage basis of very expensive incidence of UTIs and averaging them across the whole population. But again, this is all theoretical until such time as we have the money to do those clinical studies. I'm interested to hear from you how much of what your theoretical work actually is bought in by those payers, because I do believe that it's the payers that we need to get convinced of, and them tell the urologist this is what you should be doing.
Oh, good question. So there's two ways of doing health economics from my experience. One is to come to your company and say, have you already proven, not logic and intuition, but proof in clinical trials that you actually do what you propose, that you do decrease UTIs during a certain period, perioperative, because you're used after surgery or whatever it is. That have you actually proven it? And you say, no, we haven't. We've made assumptions, which is fine. It's totally fine to say, no, we haven't actually gone and done a 500 patient randomized study over 12 weeks to show that we actually do this. We don't have the money, we don't have the time. And frankly, Nick, we don't think we need to. It's logical. We have a Foley catheter that's impregnated with, amoxicillin, and so whatever it is. So you go, look, we don't need to prove it. Logic and intuition suffices. To which I would respond, incorrect. But if you're not going to go do the actual study to actually show that it does that, what you can do from health economics is say, okay, let's go do a systematic literature review and get all the data on Foley catheter usage in the perioperative period of time when our product would be used. Now I'm making it up, right? Maybe you're used as a general catheter, so whatever. Then we'll go gather that data and we'll say, okay, look, in this study done in 2005 of 1,500 patients, catheters that were removed monthly had this UTI rate versus these that were removed daily had this. And what we'll do is we'll build a model essentially that then says, okay, here's what the evidence is. Ed doesn't need to go do a 10,000 patient RCT. This has already been beat to death. You guys already pay for Foley catheters. You've been paying for them for 100 years. We just have a better one, and here's the proof. And now what you're doing when you do that is a little bit of playing with fire, because you're still paying me $90,000 to go do that, and it might not work. The payer or the hospital could buy it and be like, look, you're a catheter. You're not some new, you don't need to go do a 1 million patient RCT. It's a catheter, it's a catheter, it's a catheter. Or they could go, no. Do you decrease UTIs? I know that they do. Thank you for giving me the data that your competition does it, but this just backfired on you, Ed. You haven't shown it. So the other question from a real economic perspective is, I don't know that payers are your customer. We have to think about this. If this is a catheter that grandpa goes home with and he uses it, and then the Medicare says we'll pay for 30 a month or whatever the standard number is, we were for a 30-day supply, and those are Ed's new one is $5,000 and it's a 30-day supply. Payers are going to balk at that and say, wait, you got to show us that you're $4,000 better than what's currently done. So this is tricky. This comes to the hospital, because the hospital's like, look, we don't want our nurses changing out Foley catheters all day long. If we could just put one in and leave it for a month, our nurses would do backflips over that. There is an argument there. It's not really a health economic argument. That's perhaps a little more Joe Hage's domain to say, look, we interviewed 500 nurses, and all those nurses clearly said that if they had to only change a catheter in a patient once a month instead of once a day, that would save all this time and expense and so on. You could go gather that data, and then I guess that data could come to me and we could put dollars and cents to it. But I don't know, I'm rambling, but it's tricky because just where is the value, to whom does the value accrue? And that's your customer. And then there's no way around it. You have to prove it. And if you don't want to spend the money to go do the trial, we've got to go do that systematic literature review and say, look, Ed is now making a non-inferior claim. That at least gets you reimbursed. to say, we're at least as good as what you guys are already paying for, and here's the evidence. We're not asking for a dime more.
Yeah,
I
so
hope that helps a little bit.
that makes sense to me. And again, I think offline from here, it'd be good to have a chat with you about where we're at and that sort of thing, because I do like the idea of putting that evidence together, because I do personally understand that evidence actually makes the selling job that much easier down the road.
Look, everybody, business is being done. Nick, is your service global? I mean, our health economics in America are different than health economics in Germany. So do listeners around the globe all call Nick Anderson, or they really should find someone in their local market?
So I would argue a little bit with what you said, Joe. Health economics in America is the same as health economics in Germany. Market access isn't. So a health economic model showing that ED's catheter decreases UTIs by 20%, that's universal. Singapore wants to hear that, Germany wants to hear that, the United States wants to hear that. How you take that data and go get market access is different from Singapore, Germany, and so on. So I've been asked this question before, like, Nick, do you have European experience? And it's almost like, would you ever ask a civil engineer if they have calculus experience in the Netherlands versus calculus experience in the United States? Like, no, calculus is calculus. Health economics is health economics.
Okay. Let me redirect you,
When
John.
you spend $1, do you save $1.10?
Okay, Michelle, bye. John said, could you succinctly, that's my addition, could you succinctly tell us how your deliverable, yeah, I know, fits in the ecosystem? You have given us lots of examples about tangible health economics. Are there intangibles? Is that the job of someone like me in marketing? And in his experience, marketing has been tasked with both tangible and intangible benefits. But I'll add, perhaps the tangible ones should have been in your domain to begin, but people weren't educated enough to understand your role and why it's so imperative. Succinctly now.
Succinctly, okay, here we go. Succinctly speaking, the intangible part of this is hiring Nick Anderson for 20 hours to be your adjunct market access guy until you're ready to hire somebody full-time. And I will educate you on getting an LCD.
Which stands for?
Whether or not you should get a HCPCS code. Healthcare HCPCS, Healthcare Procedural Coding System.
You said
that's the code that gets the physician reimbursed for this.
Okay.
LCD, local coverage determination.
Thank
so
you.
An LCD is Noridian, and Noridian will reimburse a physician.
Okay.
So more of the intangible stuff is me being your educator in chief and saying, okay, you're a brilliant engineer or marketer or CEO, you're CFO, you're great with money, but you don't know anything about the game. The tangibles is this stuff. The tangibles are these budget impact models that cost $100,000 or more. The tangibles is me getting on an airplane and flying out to meet with Dr. Leland Garrett in South Carolina and taking him this and saying, we have done 3 years worth of work and we expect to get reimbursed. We want a local coverage determination on Moldex. So, or in Palmetto. So the tangibles are those. If there's a tangible.
What I'm hearing is clients would do well to hire Nick for 20 hours so they at least understand the landscape, what they should be doing, and then they can have enough information to decide when and how to approach their investors to get the funding to do the health economic study that you believe is appropriate for them. I got it. And I'm going to assume, I won't ask you to quote a rate unless you're comfortable doing so, but at $300 an hour, that's a $6,000 spend. Put it in your budget. That's, you know, it's imperative. Just give me a thumbs up if
Yes.
I've got it right directionally. Actually, I remember you're $350 an hour because we did this thing together. So make that, well, don't tax me, $7,500. Anyhow, before we conclude today, first, thank you. We have Ezekiel on the line. He's been muted the whole time and he's brand new. I invited him over from our COVID-19 channel to join us today. If you're there and you want to unmute yourself, maybe even give us a glance at, oh, you've changed your name before you were somebody else. Well, go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself. Please.
Hear me now?
I can hear you. Where are you calling in from? Tell us about you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I am calling from Beijing. Actually,
Oh, wow.
quite late at this point.
Yeah.
Yes, it was a different name because that's the name of the computer. The name of my computer is actually different from my real name.
Okay.
Yeah, and I am working with a company here in China, not in Beijing, in Shanghai, a company working with a digital PCR technologies. Well, obviously, I'm not a business owner, so I'm not listening to this conversation as someone who will have to manage the company in times of crisis. But my role in the new company, which I will be joining pretty much next month or so, I will be working on the international business development of the company. So obviously, I will be joining the company in a time of crisis. So it's important to know and to hear advices from the people that eventually can make the best out of the situation that we are going through at this point.
And what is the company that you'll be joining? What is their product or service?
It's a digital PCR manufacturer.
Digital VCR? Is that what you said?
No.
PCR, polymerase chain reaction.
Yes, correct.
Okay, I don't know much
They
about
developed kits for several types of cancer, and they also developed a kit using their technology to detect the COVID-19. The SARS-CoV-2.
Okay. Well, we'll have to find a more hospitable hour for you in a future one, and I'd like to hear more about that. But thank you for joining. Let's see, before I go look it up, what time is it for you?
It's a 12:17.
Oh, that's not so
Midnight.
bad. A little past midnight here. I was feeling bad for you. Okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
We're at an hour 20. We'll call it here today. Thank you, Nick. As is often the case when we talk, I leave with as many questions as I had going in, but they're just different questions. You brought us a little further along. I still, as I go to clients after this, I'm still nagged with this notion of finding an individual to be your champion, who is then going to be able to get in front of the VAT, Value Analysis Committee, VAC, and be able to somehow fairly represent clinical, operational, and financial. It still eludes me. I've never carried the bag. It still seems so complex, as frankly everything about this industry does. So that's why we have folks like you to educate us. So thank you, everybody. Wash your hands, don't touch your face, and I'll see you here next week. Thanks. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.